Welcome everybody to today's webinar. My name's Ian Broome and I'm going to be presenting today's webinar on the topic of increasing the reach of legal tech through integrations. So without further ado, as I mentioned, my name's Ian Broome. I'm the CEO of Fliplet and I'll tell you a little bit about Fliplet in a moment. So today's agenda is we're going to cover a little bit about Fliplet. I'm going to talk about why integrate legal technology at all. I'm going to give you some examples of integrations. I'm going to run through some options for integrating different pieces of software together. I'm then going to do a live demo, which will demonstrate how to integrate a web app into Fliplet. And I'm also going to then invert that demo and show you how to integrate Fliplet into a web app. And then we'll have a QA. Not sure it's going to take 60 minutes. I'll try to aim for about 45 minutes. How to use Zoom during this webinar. So you can ask questions at any time, just post them in the chat. And you can see that the chat icon looks like this. And please stay on mute. You should have been set on mute automatically already, so don't come off mute, and keep your camera off, which again, I think your camera should have been set to off automatically. Okay, so a quick overview of Fliplet. Fliplet makes it really easy for people to build apps with or without code. Today we are going to be talking about code, just a warning. Fliplet has a broad set of drag and drop features, and it's easy to rebrand and modify these features. Fliplet apps can be distributed to a number of different channels, including web app stores, enterprise app stores, so they can be distributed privately and publicly. And the app infrastructure required to support these apps is managed for you. And this in particular includes data management, integration, and APIs, which I'll be talking a little bit about later in this presentation. And some of our amazing customers. So you can see we work with a selection of well-known international brands. So why integrate legal technology at all? So firstly, let's talk about keeping legal tech isolated. So the benefits of keeping legal tech isolated is that it's easier to produce the piece of legal tech because you only have to focus on using one tool. It's easier to manage because you don't have the complexity of having to understand how multiple tools would work together. And therefore it is less complicated. And finally, it can sometimes help in that the messaging about what the tool can do is simpler and clearer, therefore aiding in promotion. So ultimately, keeping legal tech isolated is great if you want to keep your solutions simple or very focused. So let's talk about the benefits of integrating legal tech. So firstly, more powerful solutions can be created by integrating different solutions together. And I'll give you some examples in a little bit. More value can therefore be delivered than a single purpose solution. You can ultimately save end users time by merging solutions together. What this means is that an end user doesn't have to visit, say, multiple tools that you produce in order to extract maximum value. You can give the user a single place to go and they can utilize multiple tools or multiple features at once. By expanding the number of capabilities that a solution offers and integrating different solutions into a single proposition, you can also increase the number of audiences that may be interested. Therefore, you could end up being able to target multiple types of users at a client organization or even internally, rather than just a single, say, more narrow type of user. And then finally, this can all lead to generating more interest and engagement. So ultimately, integrating legal tech is great if you want to maximize the value of your solution and maximize your audience's time by giving them multiple solutions at once. So let's have a look at some examples of integration. So I think one that most lawyers and law firms are familiar with is Word plus add-ins. Definitely equals more advanced Word. Salesforce and App Exchange is another great example. App Exchange is basically Salesforce's marketplace. And by adding on App Exchange to Salesforce, they've been able to create a centralized customer management platform. Another example that we all use very regularly is Zoom plus Outlook, or another conferencing tool plus Outlook, means that our calendar becomes a single point for us to configure our conferencing system as well as manage our diary, as opposed to having managed two separate tools. And the one that has probably been the best example of integration from before the internet was even around is the Microsoft Office suite, and being able to merge different document formats together, such as copying a spreadsheet into a Word document and then copying that page of the Word document into a PowerPoint presentation, is a great example of an integration. And in all these scenarios, the ability to integrate with third-party products has added significant value to the initial product if it was only used in isolation. So therefore, I think we can determine that the majority of the time, integrated solutions are higher value than their isolated parts. And so I wanted to talk just briefly about our vision. We've realized that, particularly based on working with customers, that the integration of LegalTech not only increases value, but it increases the impact and it increases engagement, leading to a significant boost in the benefit an app can offer. So we're big advocates of integration. And so if you've got any integration ideas or any different tools you'd like to talk to us about that you think would work well and add value to Fliplet, please get in touch. So let's talk about the different types of legal tech. So I realized as I was putting this webinar together that we really need to make sure we're all on the same page about what are the different types of legal technology that you might be wanting to integrate. First, we've got decision trees, also known as expert systems, and that includes tools like Brighter, Nyota, Auto, Checkbox, and Fliplet also can do decision trees, and we've got some new enhancements coming out about that very soon. Doc automation, which is really the production of Word files or PDF files based on user input, that includes Contract Express, HiQ, Nyota, Brighter, and Fliplet. I think Checkbox can also do doc automation as well. Workflows, examples include HiQ, K2, SharePoint, Jira, ServiceNow, and Fliplet. And then finally, portals or reference sites, which would really just be locations where information is stored that makes it easy to find what you're looking for, includes HiQ, SharePoint, websites, of course, and Fliplet. So these are definitions. Of course, I'm not suggesting that you can get rid of all of your other legal tech products and replace them with Fliplet. Obviously a lot of these tools are very good at what they do. And a lot of these tools only do one thing very, very well. Fliplet is a bit of a jack of all trades, and we can do some of these things very well. So if you're not familiar with our capabilities in different areas, feel free to get in touch. But for the rest of this presentation, we'll assume that you're going to be using other tools and wanting to integrate them with Fliplet. So here's a couple of examples or case studies of where you might want to embed a Fliplet app into something else. So first example is HiQ embeds a Fliplet lawyer directory and news app to enable customers easy access to the information. I'm actually going to give you a demo of this later on. Next, SharePoint embeds a Fliplet BD reference app to keep internal reference information centralized for an organization. Another example could be a decision tree app embeds a Fliplet reference and lawyer directory app when the information is relevant. So what I mean is at a certain stage in a decision tree, maybe a Fliplet app is shown to the user to help them achieve a certain outcome. And then finally, and similarly, a workflow app embeds a Fliplet guidance app depending on the outcome of the flow. So as you can see, there's lots of different scenarios where you've got an existing piece of technology and it makes sense to redirect the user to a Fliplet app. Now let's talk about the opposite. Examples of legal tech embedding within Fliplet. So a decision tree could be embedded in a Fliplet app so users can assess a legal scenario, and then the result is saved back into the Fliplet app so that the user can go and see it in their saved results, for example. Another example could be a document generation app is embedded, and the documents generated are actually stored within the Fliplet app for the end user. So the Fliplet app becomes a bit of a repository, almost like a file manager for the output of the document generation app. Another example is a checklist app embeds multiple other apps to enable a user to complete the checklist. So for example, let's say it was an emergency management checklist, you might have go off and do a decision tree to assess the issue, then go off and use another tool to generate a report. And both of those could be linked from the checklist. And then we've got multiple apps are embedded into a single practice app to give customers easy access via a mobile app. So the final scenario is really just an example of where you wanted to use Fliplet to maybe give reach onto mobile of a suite of your existing web tools. And so you embed them in, you embed multiple tools into a single Fliplet app, just so that customers only have to access a single property in order to be able to access multiple other apps that you have produced. And so just jumping back, you can see these red boxes on this screen. They demonstrate this is where the Fliplet app is embedded. In this case, it's a HiQ example. And this is just an example of where a PwC Brighter application has been embedded into a Fliplet app. And this is the type of thing I'll be demoing later on the webinar. So let's talk about integration options. So a little bit of background about the integration options that I'm going to discuss with you. They're all based on web technologies. And the great thing about web technologies, unlike say, maybe proprietary technologies, they're standardized, they're compatible, they're mature, and they're low risk. And Fliplet itself is built, all of the apps that we produce are based on web technologies. So, so we're heavy advocates for web technology approaches. Now, the reason why I wanted to mention that is because I didn't want you to think that the integration options that I'm about to talk about are high risk, non-standardized, not compatible, or immature, because they're all very popular integration options. So there are really just two main options. The first is embedding, and the second is REST API integration. So let's start with embedding. The good news is it's easy, and this is what I'm going to be focusing on when I demo how integrations can happen later in the webinar. So basically, the way embedding works is you put an existing web tool into another web tool, e.g. a YouTube video is embedded into a web app. And you can see in the picture on the right-hand side, it's a screenshot of the Fliplet website with me presenting a previous webinar playing on YouTube. Now, most people know that when you play a video on YouTube, the interface is exactly the same. And that's because the way YouTube videos work is they actually play off YouTube, but they embed into other websites. This is the same as other video players, audio players, also Facebook-like, and a lot of the social sharing tools that you see around, they are actually third-party tools that when the page loads, they're called and they embed themselves into the page. This is also a bit of an explanation of how Facebook knows how many web pages you've visited, because by Facebook loading code inside the pages you access, it knows what pages you've seen. But let's not go into advertising and tracking. So the pros of embedding is it's easy, it's mature, it's widely used. YouTube uses it. I think that says a lot. And data can also be passed via the frame if you want. That's kind of an advanced topic. I'm not going to go into that, but it does make it very easy for the information to be passed from, say, this web page and passing it through to this YouTube player. The cons of this approach are it's fairly limited. You can basically do the embed or you can not do the embed. If you want anything else, it doesn't really work. The user interface is often inconsistent. So for example, I'm sure you would agree that the YouTube player integrated in that screenshot does not look like the rest of the website. It looks like the YouTube player. So on the one hand, you could say, well, that's great because everybody knows how to use the YouTube player. On the other hand, you could say that's bad because I want YouTube to better integrate with my design, better integrate with my user interface. The other big con is that web browsers have gotten more and more concerned about apps being embedded in other apps, mainly because of privacy and security issues. So what this means is that security has become more and more of an issue, and by default, embedding has more restrictions placed on it. Now, as you'll see from the demos I'm going to show today, that hasn't inhibited me being able to do successful integrations. But what it does mean is if you ever have any issues, you might have to contact the tool that you're embedding and just have a conversation with them about security settings. Or if they expect you to embed it, they might have management interface to manage the security settings. And therefore, you just need to consider them when you're setting up the embed. And then finally, because one of the things about embedding is it doesn't always intelligently figure out the height, the width, and things like this. So you might need a small amount of CSS code to make it look good, but I'm going to show you what that CSS code is likely to look like later on in this presentation. And then the second method that I mentioned is REST API. Now, this is a completely code-based solution. And what REST APIs do is they connect the data and sometimes the security system between apps using code. And so an example of this could be an app wants to retrieve a list of all records from another app that match a query, and they might use the API. Now, the pros of this approach is it's very powerful and it's very stable. The cons of this is it requires code, and it requires the third party that you're integrating with to support the code and offer an API in order to be able to retrieve the data. So let's just have a look at an example of how that might work. So let's say that you've got a decision tree app. What happens is you've got a little bit of code in here that when the result appears, it pushes it into, for example, Fliplet's REST API. Then what could happen is the user loads up a Fliplet app or transitions to a different screen. And the results are therefore retrieved from our API and displayed in the app. So this is an example of the decision tree app pushing the data into our API, which then allows it to be retrieved by another Fliplet app. In a perfect world, you'd probably use both methods because each method has limitations. So as an example, you might embed an app to merge multiple solutions together, such as having a screen in Fliplet with a decision tree app embedded into it. But then what you might need to do is add code to the decision tree to transfer the data from the decision tree out to an external REST API so that it can be shown in the next screen in an app. I haven't focused today on doing the data transfer part. That's quite a complicated topic, so I don't want to kind of go into lots and lots of code today. So I'm just going to be focusing on how you do the embed. But I think that that's what the majority of people will want to do. And I think it'll enable you to move quite quickly with starting to do integrations after today's webinar. Just before I start the demos, I just want to remind you, if you've got any questions, please post them and we'll answer them later on. I'm aware that this can get quite technical and there may be some key questions you want covered that I haven't addressed so far in the slides. So without further ado, let's dive in to a bit of a demo. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to integrate a web app into Fliplet. And for this, I'm going to use an existing Brighter app. So let's start by pulling up this web page. So this is PwC Legal Austria, and they have Rule Keeper Compliant Means Easy is kind of the name of this landing page. And if you scroll down, they've got a series of different tools listed here. So what I've done is I've already opened up the data breach notification check, which is here. And you can see, according to the URL, that this is actually provided by Brighter. And so Brighter is hosting this, and it's just a web app. And so here we can see it's a data breach notification check. And if I scroll down, I can click this, and this is what the user interface looks like. So I can now go through, and this is obviously it behaving as a completely standalone web app, not integrated into anything other than running in my browser. So let's just go back. Oops, I think I've gone too far. Need to go back here. I have a feeling I need to get to, here we go. I've gotten to the initial. So the initial screen. So now I've got the web app's URL. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to dive in here, and I've already got a little bit of a demo app set up. So I'm just going to show you how I would now incorporate this Brighter app into Fliplet. So the first thing I've done is I've created a blank screen. I'm not going to show you how to create a blank screen. I'm guessing most people on this call know how to create a screen in Fliplet already. And all I'm going to do is drop in a container. That just helps me to kind of better manage any embeds that I'm doing. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to paste in the URL, and I'm just going to convert this into an iframe. So make it iframe source equals, and we just close the iframe. Okay, so now if I click save and run, and I close this, you can see that, oh dear, the size of my my iframe is very small. kind of looks right, but it's definitely not big enough. So what I've done is, you can see I've already created the iframe, but I've got a little bit of CSS code here. Now, the CSS code is very simple. I'll explain what it does. So the first thing it does is it sets the height of the iframe, and it basically sets it to the full width of the screen minus the little toolbar that we've got, which is 44 pixels. And it sets it to be the width of the screen, and it turns off this border so it makes it look seamlessly integrated. So if we now do save and run again, there we go. We've now got the data breach check notification running in the browser, in a frame inside the Fliplet app. And if I go through and I click next, I can use it. I'm not paying too much attention to but you can see that it's working fine. The other thing that's worth noting is if I just change the size and rerun it, because brighter applications are responsive in their sizing, it automatically scales down. And so it works nicely on smartphone, and it also works really nicely on web, so I can just continue using it. So basically, these two technologies, this brighter application, dropping it into a Fliplet app, other than putting in this one line of code to set the frame and putting in a little bit of CSS code to kind of make sure that it's the right size inside the Fliplet app, I'm basically done. This integration is now complete. Now, there are a couple of things you can do to make this a little bit more snazzy. So one of the things that I'll just quickly show you is if I switch over to preview mode, you can see that it takes a little while to load. One of the things that I've actually done is I've created another version of this, but it shows very briefly, and my internet connection is very quick at the moment, but it actually loads a little bit of a spinner until this page starts loading. So if the third-party tool that you're integrating with is a little bit slow and you don't want it to have a negative impact on the users of your Fliplet app, what you can do is incorporate just a little bit more code. And what it does is it adds a spinner and then correctly loads it. So this is really just polish, and it's only needed if the app that you're integrating is a bit slow. Okay, so if I now jump back here, that basically concludes my demo of how to integrate a third-party tool into Fliplet. And then let's move on to the next part of the demo, which is how to integrate a Fliplet into a web app. How to integrate a Fliplet app into a web app. So I've created this LegalTech webinar demo, and what I've done is I have published it to this URL. So if I copy this URL and I bring it up over here, this is my blank screen. Now, I haven't published my app since I embedded the Brighter app into the blank screen, so this is correct. I shouldn't be seeing anything. But what I've got in here is a newsfeed screen. And you can see when I've gone to the newsfeed screen, it's changed the URL. So I'm going to grab that URL, and now I'm going to dive into HiQ. Now, I am just going to delete this screen. So I'll be the first to admit I know very little about HiQ. So if anybody feels free to kind of criticize how I'm doing things, that's totally warranted. I'm probably about to give you a fairly bumbling demo of how to do an integration of a Fliplet app into HiQ. But on the other hand, if I can do it, anybody who knows more about HiQ can probably do it as well. So what I've done is I've just gone into the admin options, and I've gone into the home screen module settings, and I'm just adding a sub page. So I'll call this kind of embed demo. So there we go. I've created an embed demo screen. So what I now need to do is I'm just going to go to the home screen, and I'm going to go to my embed demo screen. Okay, so I've now got a new screen in HiQ, and what I need to do is I need to click edit, and I need to click add. Now I'm just going to put in the content editor, and I'm just going to call this let's call this latest news, because that's what I'm going to be embedding. So there we go. We've got the latest news content block, and now I just click source. Now, basically, I can just do iframe source, paste in the URL that I got from my news feed, and oops, iframe. Okay, and now I click OK. and I click save, and there's my newsfeed. But once again, styling, as I warned you with embeds, needs some tweaks. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come in here. Now, the good news is that Fliplet's website actually has a whole support article on how to embed your Fliplet web app into something else, such as a website, or in this case, HiQ. And it comes with all this code. So what I'm going to do is, rather than kind of make you watch me type all of this, I'm just going to copy this code. Because as you can see, it's got quite a bit of CSS code, and it also has quite a bit of, so this is the CSS code, just setting the width to the height and kind of setting other settings that make sure that the frame shows up correctly. But underneath that, we've also got a piece of code that intelligently resizes the frame if the parent window resizes. So this is really just a precaution in case people start resizing their browser window when accessing HiQ, and it has a Fliplet app embedded into it. So just to be cautious, I'm just going to move this p tag down here, because I know from experience HiQ likes to have stuff wrapped in a p tag. Okay, so now I'm going to save, and I have successfully made a mistake, and I realized that this Fliplet app styles needs to just be applied here. So this is basically me just applying a class to the iframe, and now I'll do save again, and voila, here's my newsfeed now embedded into a HiQ page, and I can interact with it, and it completely operates. Now, one of the things you might have noticed already is, oh, that's weird, it's got a toolbar inside HiQ's other toolbars. And one of the things that I would recommend is, if you know you're going to be embedding apps and you don't want the hamburger menu and things like that that comes with Fliplet apps to be visible, we can basically turn this top bar off in your Fliplet app, so then it's a full screen newsfeed. Okay, so that's a quick demo about how you would embed a Fliplet app into a HiQ page. But considering this is a partner of ours HiQ account, as you can see, engineer.legal, bit of a shout out to Dan for letting me use his account. I noticed that he's actually already done a bit of an integration of a better looking Fliplet app into his own homepage of his HiQ instance. So you can see here, he's labeled it M&A contacts. He's got a number of different people listed here. I can filter people down to London. I can search, and I can also click and see their details. And this is all nicely sitting in a little frame off to the side. I think one of the things that makes this look really smart is the fact that these colors match. You know, he's branded everything this lovely orange. So yeah, so this is an example of a more polished demo. As I mentioned, I'm not completely confident when it comes to HiQ. So I'm glad to see that Dan has been able to do a nicer integration than me. Okay, so what we've now been able to do is integrate we've been able to integrate Fliplet into a web tool. So we've basically completed today's webinar. In summary, I've covered the benefits of integrating LegalTech. I've spoken about the different examples of integration and how to maximize the value. I've demonstrated the embed technical option, but I also spoke about the REST API option, and I demoed how to integrate a web app into a Fliplet app, in the case of a Brighter web app into Fliplet. And I've also demonstrated how to integrate a Fliplet app into a web app by integrating Fliplet into HiQ. So without further ado, if anybody has any questions, I'd now be happy to answer them.
So we've got a couple on chat to me, Ian, so I'll ask you those. If there's any more people, please do feel free to put them in the chat. So talking about security, the first one, how does Fliplet ensure when integrating with third parties that security is still being complied with?
Yeah, it's a great point. So I think by default, when an embed happens, there is no data shared by default. So just the fact that Fliplet has integrated with a Brighter application does not mean that Brighter has any data from Fliplet or vice versa. In order for data to be shared, some explicit code would have to be written to actually transfer data between those two systems. So by default, the security that Brighter provides to its customers is intact, and the security that Fliplet provides to its customers is intact. And the only thing that's happening is on the client's machine, one is appearing in the other, but no data is getting shared.
Brilliant, thank you. Hope that answers the question. Another one similar, but how does Fliplet authenticate a user between the different tools?
Yeah, so that's a tricky one. There are a couple of different ways to solve this problem. I mentioned that you can pass data through the frame. That's definitely an option. What that means is that the parent solution that may be authenticated with a solution can actually pass, say, a user ID through the frame to the sub app, and the sub app can then use that information to verify against the Fliplet API and say, hey, I've been told that user ID 789 has signed in. Who is this? And it could return and say, well, that's Chris Longmuir. The other option is to explicitly pass information through REST APIs. So when the sub app or the embedded app loads, it retrieves data via the REST API about who is logged into me. And in turn, it can also pass data back to the parent app saying, this is what the user has done. There are a couple of different methods. It really depends, and based on our experience, it really depends on what the customer is confident doing, also what the other technology allows us to do. So we have found sometimes you're not able to include third-party JavaScript code or REST API code in other tools, which means there's a restriction on what can be passed around. So I think ultimately the specific answer to that question comes down to what tools you're integrating.
Brilliant, thank you. Great question from Heather. So does the processing of data reside in the cloud?
Yeah, so I think most web tools, like I think Brighter and Neota and the other tools that I mentioned, most of them are cloud solutions. And as I say, if you're already working with one of those tools, I imagine they've already passed your InfoSec requirements, etc. Yes, so I think most of these are cloud-based products. Of course, if you had on-prem products, for example, SharePoint is regularly still housed on-premise by law firms, then when a staff member accesses SharePoint, they're not accessing a cloud-based solution, but when a customer accesses a page on SharePoint that embeds a Fliplet app, the Fliplet app is coming from the cloud. But again, that has been pre-approved by InfoSec. There's no surprises there.
Brilliant. Couple more. I'm going to come to the tricky one in a minute. Thank you, Andrew. Just you see, you're worried now.
We'll see.
Just before that, really good one, because this is really about next steps. Really, are there tools on the Fliplet platform that can help me integrate, or is this something that we manage?
So, I mean, the integrations that I showed today are very easy. It probably took me about 15 minutes to figure out how to do each one. I think if you would like to have a conversation about how to integrate two different tools together, we're more than happy to give you guidance on how you could integrate, like what we think might be the best approach to achieve the outcome you're looking for. Depending on our experience with the third parties that you're trying to integrate with, we might need you to then go and talk to them and ask them questions about, how would they prefer, for example, data is passed back and forwards, or do they have any security around embedding that our customers need to turn on or off in order to embed apps into a Fliplet app. Fliplet, because it's been intended to be a web app solution, Fliplet doesn't have any restrictions around where customers can embed their Fliplet app by default, because a lot of our customers explicitly want to produce public-facing apps with Fliplet, so they don't mind where it's embedded. But if that is of concern, Fliplet does offer security options, which you can turn on, that will then restrict access to apps via IP addresses. And quite a number of our customers, where they've embedded, say, sensitive internal apps into SharePoint, have restricted access only to their corporate IP addresses, meaning that if you're not connected to the corporate network, you can't actually access the app, even though it's hosted on the cloud.
Superb, thank you. One more before we get to the one. So what restrictions, if any, does Fliplet have on our API?
I know that different Fliplet plans have restrictions on API, like what you can do with it. But assuming that you aren't restricted by any plan features, there are no restrictions. Like Fliplet is pretty generous, exposing quite a lot of APIs. And actually, if I share my screen again, just drop out of this presentation, I can quickly bring up the developer documents. So we've recently updated our dev documentation site. You can see here it's got REST API. Yeah, the aspects that you can interrogate with our APIs include data sources and not only managing and editing and things like that data sources, but also the data in them, of course. Media files, you can trigger and manage notifications, which includes email notifications. You can read and update your app's data, and you can manage push notifications as well. So these are all available via our REST API currently.
Super, thank you. And that probably answers the question earlier a little bit more in depth as well about next steps. If you are looking to do it, the support site is a great place to have a look for some documentation on it. So I'm going to ask you the tricky one now. So
okay.
Are you able to show how to pass data back and forth?
Okay,
in a Neota app.
Yes. So I'm not able to show you right now. I don't have access to a Neota account. If Andrew's asking, though, he knows because he's seen me do it before that I've been able to integrate Neota apps as well. Neota apps do have security around where they can be embedded. So a customer would have to configure some settings in Neota to ensure that it can be embedded into a Fliplet app without any security problems. And I believe that you can put into Neota apps JavaScript code, which means that at a certain point in a Neota app, you could pass data out to Fliplet servers, and vice versa. The Neota app can then read data from Fliplet servers as well. Or Fliplet can pass data through the embedded frame that I mentioned earlier as well. It really depends on what data needs to be passed backwards and forwards and the level of configuration. But yes, it would definitely require quite a bit of JavaScript code. And of course, because we're bringing two different technologies together, we'd want to do quite a bit of testing.
Brilliant, thank you. I thought you'd like that one. And can Fliplet use SharePoint online lists as data source? And if so, is it easily doable?
Yeah, it is. So let me just quickly share my screen again. So in our developer documentation, when I find my mouse, we have integrations. We have this system called the data integration service. So this is a little piece of software that can connect to on-prem SharePoint. If it's SharePoint online, we can use the REST API, but I wanted to bring this up just to highlight that we have an on-prem integration as well. And what that enables us to do is to connect to either the on-premise SharePoint API or the cloud-based SharePoint API. And retrieve the data from the list and use that to funnel into an app. And we've got quite a few customers that are using SharePoint lists to populate news feeds inside Fliplet apps.
Brilliant, thank you. And we'll do one final one. So does Fliplet support clients maintaining APIs after one has been built?
Fliplet doesn't enable you to build APIs. So Fliplet provides a set of APIs, and we provide a method so by exposing REST APIs, we allow third-party services to interact with them. That's not creating new APIs. If a customer has their own service where they can create APIs, Fliplet can integrate with them as well.
Super, thank you. And
Excellent.
I think that's all the questions. One last check. Yep, that's all the questions for now.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for attending today's webinar. In case you've enjoyed yourself and you'd like to learn a little bit more, Fliplet has some upcoming webinars. So one of our very popular apps at the moment is called a Return to Office app. Lots of customers are using this. And so on Thursday, the 15th of October, we'll be presenting what's next for the Return to Office template and the enhancements that we're going to be launching very soon. And then on the 20th of October, we've got information about a brand new app template that's going to help organizations manage and run virtual events. So if either of those are of interest, you can go to fliplet.com/webinars and register, and you'll receive the calendar invite and notifications about them. Other than that, thank you so much for attending today's webinar. I hope you found it useful and not too overwhelming. Technical topics can be a little bit tough, but hopefully the demos help to give you some clarity. Yes, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you for joining us.